Hello friends, welcome back to the Laravel 11 design pattern series in programming fields. I am Umesh Rana. In the previous video, we covered up the Laravel design patterns in which we understood what are the design patterns, why they are essential to use in Laravel 11 and what are the benefits of using Laravel design patterns. And we checked out the difference between messy code and organized code as well. In today's video, we are exploring one of the most powerful design patterns you will ever need, the repository pattern. Have you ever felt like your controllers are cluttered with database queries or your code is hard to test and maintain? The repository pattern fixes all of that. If you are tired of writing queries directly in your controllers or having tightly coupled database logic, the repository pattern is your solution. This helps abstract your data access layer, and this makes your code cleaner, testable, and more scalable. So by the end of this video, you will not only understand what the repository pattern is, but you will also learn how to implement it step by step with real-world examples in Laravel 11. But before moving to the implementation of the repository pattern, firstly we will understand why use the repository pattern. Alright, so we will discuss about the three key reasons to use repository pattern in Laravel. The first thing is decouples database logic. So instead of writing queries directly in the controllers, you can isolate them in a repository, and that we saw in the previous video by organizing the messy code in the different modular approach like service classes and repository. Next, this will improve the testability. So by abstracting the data access layer, you can easily mock repositories for unit testing. Last but not least, flexible data sources. Whether you use MySQL, MongoDB, or APIs, the repository acts as a middleman. So your controller does not care where the data comes from. Alright, let's quickly jump to the implementation part. So here I have a fresh setup of Laravel 11 application. If I will come to the VS Code editor, here we have not created any files or controllers. Okay, so to implement the repository design pattern, I will quickly create an example of to-do application. So firstly I will come to the resources, views. Here I will create a new folder as to-dos. Inside this I will create a blade file as index.blade.php. Okay, and inside this I will generate the bootstrap 5 skeleton with HTML. So I will type bs5. Okay, this has generated the skeleton of bootstrap 5. I will quickly update the things here. So I will update the title as repository design pattern in Laravel 11. Okay, here I will remove this header, main and footer. Instead of that, I will create one container. I will type .container, and here I will use yield directive. I will pass content. This is fine. So what I will do, I will create a separate layout and I will extend that layout in different blades. So here inside this views folder, I will create one file as layouts.blade.php. I will cut this entire HTML snippet and I will move it inside layouts.blade. Okay, this is fine. Now inside this index blade, I will extend that layout. So I will be using extends directive. Inside this, I will pass blade name as layouts. This is fine. Now I will use section directive here so that we can pass dynamic content in the yield section. Here I will use section content and we will have end section. Now in between section, I will create row, column. So I'm going to create a new form here. So basically that will be for creating a to-do list, and for performing the CRUD operations like for create, render, update, edit and delete, I will be using repository design pattern. Okay, so let's quickly design a basic form here. Inside this I will add form and I will define action. So I will define a route here, route, and this will trigger to-dos.store. Method will be post and I will use csrf directive here. Next I will create a div for grouping the form elements. So I will create label inside this. This will be for, let's suppose, title, and input type will be text, class will be form control, placeholder, title, ID will be title, and also I will pass name attribute here, name will be title. This is fine. Let me dock this window. I will add margin bottom as 3. Let's duplicate this. This is for title, and I will create this for description, and instead of input type text, I will change this to text area. Okay. This is fine. Next, I will add one button here. So I will add margin top of 4, and I will add one button here. Button type submit, class will be btn primary. Okay, submit. This is fine. And here inside this layouts blade, I will add padding y of 4 inside this container. Now we will have to render this index blade. So what I will do, I will create a controller first. So I will come to the terminal, and here I will create a controller for performing the CRUD operations for the to-do. So I will create a controller using the artisan command. So I will type php artisan make controller to-do controller, and here I will pass the flag as -- resource. Let's hit enter. Yes, this has created the to-do controller with resources method. Let's come to the code editor again. Inside the app http controllers, we have the to-do controller created, and this has created these all methods here. Alright. Now I will be using this index function. Here I will be returning view as todos.index, and inside this index function I will specify the return type view. So I will be using eliminate view here. This is fine. Now we will have to execute this index function. So we will have to define a route. So I will come to the routes web.php, and here this route is not needed. So I will create a resource route here. So I will be creating route : resource function. Inside this I will define endpoint as to-dos, and here we will have to call the to-do controller. This is fine. Now we can easily access the routes. So I will come to the browser, and here I will type /todos. Okay. So this is rendering properly here. Now we will have to perform the submit action here. So for handling the CRUD operations, I will be using repository design pattern. Now in the next step, we will set up the repository design pattern for this to do. But before implementing the repository design pattern, let's quickly understand the directory structure of the repository. So I will come to the code editor. Here I will create a new file, and I will give the name as outline. Okay. So if we'll take a look to the current folder structure of Laravel application, here we have the app folder. Inside this app folder, we have the HTTP and controllers. Alright. So according to the repository design pattern, we will have to follow one architecture. So I will specify the directory structure that we are going to cover up here. Inside app, we already have HTTP and controllers, so that I'm not going to mention here. We will have to create interface. Okay. So inside app, we will have interface, and inside this interface, I will create interface for the to do. So we will have to do interface here. Alright. Also we will have to create a repository. So we will have to create repositories inside app itself. So inside app, we will have a new directory as repositories, and inside the repositories, we will have to create repository class. So we will have to create repository class for the to do. So we can define class as to do repository. Alright. So this will be our folder structure basically for maintaining the repository design pattern. And also we will have to bind the to-do interface and to-do repository together in order to execute the functions. So that we will see here in the next step. Firstly, let's set up the directory structure as per this. So I will come to the terminal first and I will type php artisan command in order to see the list of available commands provided by artisan console. And if we'll come under the make section, here we have the make class and make interface command, and these commands have been introduced in Laravel 11. Previously, Laravel was not providing the flexibility to create class and interface using terminal. We needed to create that manually. So let's take a benefit of this class and interface here. So I'm going to create a class first. So I will type php artisan make class and I will create a directory for the class as repository. Just like this. Inside this, I will create a repository class for the to-do. So I will create class name as to-do repository. Let's hit enter. And similarly, I will create interface as well. So instead of make class, I will change this to interface and I will have to change the directory name as well. So I will create interfaces directory and this will be to-do interface. Okay, this is fine. Let's hit enter. Yes, we have the to-do repository and interface have been created. Let's check out this. So inside app, we have a new folder as interfaces. Inside this, we have the to-do interface. Also inside this repository, we have the to-do repository class created. This is fine. Now let's start with the to-do interface. So inside the to-do interface, we will have to define few functions for managing the CRUD operations for the to-do. Okay. So for performing the CRUD operations, we need a couple of functions here. Let's suppose I will define public function get to-dos. So this get to-dos means this will fetch all the to-dos. Alright. So inside the interface, we have defined the function here. But according to the object-oriented programming concept, we will have to implement this function body inside a class. Okay. So that's why we have created the to-do repository class here. So I will copy this function. I will come to the to-do repository and after this constructor, I will create a function, public function, and I will paste that function as get to-dos. This is fine. And here I will add dump and die fetching all to-dos. This is just for a message. This is fine. So inside the interface, we have defined the function and that function definition is implemented here in the to-do repository class. Alright. Now in order to execute this function, we will have to bind this interface and repository together so that we can call it directly from the controller. Alright. So in order to bind the interface and repository, Laravel provides the provider. So we will have to bind it inside the service provider. So if I will come to the providers folder, here we have the app service provider. Okay. Inside this we have the register and boot method. So for binding the interface and class, we will have to register it inside this register function. Alright. In case if you don't want to use this app service provider, you can create a custom service provider using the command line and you can bind the interface and repository in that provider. And thereafter you will have to register that provider. So as of now, I'm not going to create another provider here because by default Laravel 11 provided app service provider here. So inside this register function, I will bind interface and repository class together. So I will write $this app and I will call the bind function here. Inside this bind function, we will have to pass the interface and repository. So in the first parameter, we will have to pass the to-do interface. So let's call to-do interface here and we will have to import that interface here. Alright. And to-do interface, then we will have to pass class and next we will have to pass the repository. So we will have to call to-do repository class. This is fine. So we have bound the interface and repository together. Okay. This is done. Let's close this. Now let's come to the controller. Inside this to-do controller, we will be calling the repository function. So inside the repository, we have the get to-do function. Alright. But for fetching this function inside the controller, we won't use the repository. Rather, we will be calling through this interface. Alright. Let me make you clear. So inside this to-do repository, we have this get to-do function. Now I want to call the get to-do function here inside the to-do controller. But I want to call that get to-do function directly using the object of this to-do repository class. Instead, I will be calling through this to-do interface instance. Okay. But before calling that function, we will have to implement the to-do interface inside the to-do repository class. So I will be using implements keyword, and this will implement the to-do interface. So we will have to import this to-do interface here. This is done. So this is all about the repository setup here. Now we can call this get to-do function directly inside the to-do controller via to-do interface. So firstly, I will create constructor here inside the controller. So I will define construct function, and inside this constructor, I will inject to-do interface. So I have imported the to-do interface here, and I will create one instance of this to-do interface. Alright. And also I will define one variable here as public $to-do interface. Now I will assign this to-do interface to this public variable. So I will write $this to-do interface is equals to to-do interface. Now if we come to the index function, here we are returning the index view. So here I want to call that to-do repository get to-do function. So inside this to-do controller, I will call $this to-do interface implies get to-do function. Okay, this is fine. So we have called this get to-do function from the controller, and this has been called through the interface without creating any instance of the to-do repository class. Let's come to the browser. Let's refresh this application. Yes, here we can see this has dumped that fetching all to-dos message, and this is coming from the repository. But ideally, we have not called this function using the repository class. Instead, we have called it through the interface. So this is the magic of repository design pattern. Okay. Similarly, we can define more functions inside the interface, and we can implement this function inside the class here, and we can call these functions inside the controller via this interface. Okay. So let's simplify the to-do architecture here. So in the index function, I want to list out the to-dos. Okay. And this will be fetched through the repository design pattern. So here I will come to the index blade. We have defined this function here, and after this form, I will list out all the to-dos here. So let's create the functionality to save the to-do here, so that we can fetch all the to-dos using the repository design pattern. So let's come to the to-do repository class, and here I will remove this dump and die. Okay. Let me add annotation function get to-dos, and this function will fetch all the to-dos from the to-do model, and we will have to create a to-do model as well. So let's do the setup of model and migration. So let's come to the terminal, and let's create a model. So I will type PHP annotation make model to do, and I will specify -m for migration. Let's hit enter. Let's come to the code editor again, and inside the database migrations, we have the to-dos migrations created. Let's define few fields here, string, title, and I will set nullable by default. And next I will define description, and this will be nullable by default. This is fine. You can define more fields according to your need. I'm doing a quick setup here, so I'm not going to add more fields here. So according to the form, I have defined the title and description here. Now let's come to the models. Inside app models, we have the to-do model. Inside this, let's add fillable property, protected fillable. Inside this array, let's add title and description for the fillable property. This is fine. So the model and migration setup has been done. Now inside the to-do repository, here we can import to-do model. So we will write to-do all, okay, and we will have to return this all to-do here. This is fine. Now let's come to the interface, and here we will have to define the function to save the to-do. So I will define one more function as public function save to do, and here we will have to pass the request data, that means form request data. So I will pass $request here. Okay, this is fetch all to do, and this is for save to do. Now we will have to implement this function inside to do repository. That's why here it thrown the error. This is saying this save to do has not implemented this here inside the class. So let's define the function as public function save to do, and here we will have to capture one parameter. So let's define request here, and I will add dump request all. This is fine. This function will save the to do, save to do. Now I will come to the controller, and here we have the store function. So we will have to call that save to do function from this store function here. So let's copy this to do interface, and we have the function name as save to do. Let's copy this and let's call this function from here, and we will have to pass this form request object. Okay, this is fine. Let's come to the browser, let's refresh, and we will have to execute the migration. So let's come to the terminal, let's execute the migration. Yes, migration has been executed. Let's refresh the application. Let me zoom out. Okay, so as of now I have not added any form validation here, that we will cover in the next step. So I will just quickly type to do title description, and I will click on submit. Yes, on submit, here it dumped and form request, and we can see this is showing in the to do repository class line number 32. If we come to the to do repository class, here we added this dump and in line number 32. Okay, that means our form request is reaching to this to do repository class, and this has been reached via this to do interface. Okay, this is fine. Now inside the controller, we can add the form validation. So we can quickly create a basic form validation here. So I will write request validate function. Inside this, we will have to define the array for the title, required, description, required. And if we try to submit the form now, yes, the validation has been triggered, and we can display the validation error here. So let's display the validation error message in the index blade. Here, after this input type text, I will create p element, and I will pass class text danger. Inside this, I will display the error message. So I will add error directive here. If error has title, then this will display the error message inside this, and we will have end error block. So I will display $message here. Same thing for the description. This will be for description. Let's save and let's refresh. Let's try to submit. Yes, we have the validation error for the title and description. Now let's quickly save the form data. So I will come to the code editor, and inside this repository class, now here I will call the to do model create function. Inside this, I will form one array, and here I will pass title, and this will come from the request title, and similarly we will have to add description, and this will come from the request description, and after creating this will return the to do object. So I will come to the to do controller. Here I will capture that to do. Okay, and here I will add return back with success. To do has been created. Better I can add if condition. If we have to do returned from the repository, okay, then this will return back with success. Else this will return back with error, unable to create to do. Now we can capture this session message inside the index blade. So here at the top I will use bootstrap alert class. So I will use .alert success. Here I will use if condition. If we have session and inside that session we will have to check session success. I will capture this in a variable as $message. Else if session has error, then again I will copy this block here and I will add inside this else if block, and here I will display $message, and this will be for error. I will change this to danger. Okay, let's come to the browser, let's refresh, and here let's try to create a to do. So I will zoom out first. Laravel 11 repository design pattern. Let's click on submit. Here we could not see that success message. Let's come to the code. Okay, here we have the typo mistake. It will be session get success. If we'll come to the database, inside the database.sqlite, we have the to do's table. Yes, that to do has been created here. So let's come to the application. Let's refresh. Let's create another to do as to do for Laravel 11. Let's submit. Yes, we are getting that success response here. We can keep it inside column. Let's cut it, and here I will add it. This is fine. Let's refresh, and here I just want to display all the to do's, so we can get all the to do's in the same page here. So let's come to the code editor. Inside the interface, we already defined this get to do's function, and this function has been implemented inside this to do repository class, and from here we are fetching all the to do's and we are returning back. So this is fine. We will have to come to the controller again, because from here we are calling that function. Now we will have to capture all the to do's just like this, and we will have to return back in the compact as to do's, and inside this to do's index blade we will have to render the available to do's. So after this form, here I want to render this to do. List out the to do's. So I will create one table layout as table class table striped, and I will create t-head. Inside this I will create one tr. Inside this tr I will define th, so this will be for SL, and let's replicate these columns. This will be for title, description. Now let's define t-body here. Inside this I will create one tr. Okay, and here I will use for else directive. For else $to do's as $to do, and I will move this tr inside this for else, and let's display the to do item. So I will pass loop index here. Next we have the title, so I will call to do title description. Okay, and for the empty block I will add td. I will pass call span as 3, and here I will change the message as not to do found. This is fine. Let's come to the browser. Let's refresh, and here we have the error as loop index. Okay, we have to remove this function. This is not needed. Let's refresh. Okay, this is fine. Better we can display the to-do ID here. To-do ID. Okay, this is fine. So here all the to-dos are displaying using the repository pattern. Similarly, we can define more functions here, just like we have defined for get to-dos, save to-do. You can define for edit, update, delete. Alright. So this is all about the repository design pattern. If we'll come to the controller, here we can say we have a cleaned code defined inside the controller. We have injected the to-do interface directly inside the constructor, and using that instance, we are calling the repository function inside the controller. So here our controller become more neat and cleaned, and our codes are more organized. Regarding this form validation, we can keep it separate by creating a form request here, and we can define all the validation rules and logic inside that. So by using this way, we can keep our code more maintainable and organized. Alright, and our functions are reusable. So we can call this get to-do function in any of the controller or class. And also for the testing purpose, we can test this function isolated because this is not dependent here. So that's all. And congratulations, you have just learned how to implement the repository pattern in Laravel 11 step by step. In today's video, we have covered what is repository pattern, how to create a repository class and interface. Also, we saw how to bind it to the Laravel's service container. So inside this service provider, we bound the interface and repository together. And then we saw how to keep our controller codes very clean. Okay, so if you enjoyed this video, here is what you have to do next. Hit the like button to let me know if you found it helpful, and subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video on this service pattern. And also don't forget to share this video with your developer friends so that they can write better code too. Drop a comment below and let me know, have you used the repository pattern before, or will you try it in your next Laravel project? In the next video, we will explore the service pattern in Laravel to encapsulate the business logic. So until next time, keep building smarter, cleaner and scalable Laravel applications. See you very soon in the next video. Until then, happy coding.